Welcome back, guys. We are starting with vocabulary, and we're hopping into our red band. Sorry. Our learning target. I can understand and use important learn about the Harlem Renaissance. Adventure is a thrilling or an unusual experience, or it can be an exciting activity that you enjoy doing. An adventure might be camping, and some people like to camp all the time. Some people, that's a new experience for them, and they're very excited. Other adventures would be like skydiving, jumping out of an airplane, or climbing up a very tall mountain, or going white water rafting. Those are adventures. Fame. Fame is a widespread reputation. That means everybody knows who you are, especially for great achievement. So, for example, the Olympics. A lot of Olympians achieve fame because of how they do in the Olympics. Fame can also mean that you're an actor or you are a famous author with a very popular book. You can achieve fame through that. Great achievement. International means relating to two or more countries. So during the pandemic, when COVID, that was an international thing. It wasn't just in our country, it was across the world through two nations. Symbolized. Served as a symbol for something else or represented. So this America that represents or symbols our country. Discrimination. A prejudice, if you will. Some people can experience discrimination because of the color of their skin. Some people can discriminate other people by if they're a girl. Just many different things of discrimination. Prosperous. Having success, wealth, or good means that you're doing pretty well in the money department. Pride. A sense of one's personal worth or dignity. That means that you know you've done your best, choose to do the right thing, and you're very proud of the things that you are doing. Launch. To start something with enthusiasm. So if I'm thinking, you know what, I think I'm going to open a store, and I get everything ready and I get all the merchandise on the and I say, okay, on Monday, I'm going to launch the opening of my new store. That means I'm starting it and I'm very excited about it. Language that is spoken in a particular area or by a particular group, and it differs from other forms of the same language. As Southerners, and I know you've heard me say how we say words sometimes is a lot different than how it's actually pronounced. So if you've ever met someone who is from up north, like New York or Chicago or any of those things or any of those areas, you'll notice that they say things in a different way than we do. Around them, we seem to our words sound a lot slower. Cast. These are the actors in a play or a movie. If you are cast, that means you're one of the characters. Lavish. Given in great amounts or more than necessary. If someone wants to use so many gifts, they're all wonderful. Unaffected by the passage of time or eternal. That means it never goes out of style. For example, girls wearing their hair in tails. That's a timeless hair trend. People wore their hair in ponytails way back when, and people still wear, or girls still wear their hair in ponytails. Now we're going to hop into the comprehension. Let's read our learning target together. I can learn and apply the comprehension strategies of asking and answering questions and visualizing as I read the Harlem. Some background information. Obviously, we are reading about a time in American history. Renaissance. This is when African American art, writing, and music thrived. Harlem is a neighborhood and in the northern part of Manhattan, that is in New York, and Manhattan is a city within New York City. So it is a very popular neighborhood. Renaissance. Say that word to yourself. Renaissance means for a revival in art, literature, and learning. That didn't help me any. How about you? So, the Renaissance was a time when people started to learn new things, make beautiful art, and write important books. In. It's like when you find a new way to do something not been done in a really long time, and it makes everybody really excited that it's back. This rebirth of ideas helped and created things. This informational text, and we know the elements of an informational text is that it is about real people, animal, places, or events. It contains facts that can be checked with other sources. It might use diagrams, photographs, or other text features. It presents information in a clear way. It describes events in order in which they happen or sequencing, and it may be organized by topics. Again, the Harlem Renaissance is the title. Just take a moment and look at that picture. That's an actual picture, and we know that this photograph is a piece of text evidence that can help us and what life was like in the 1920s. You look at that. Here are some questions I want you to think about to yourself as we read. Why would people want to feel like they are part of a community? And is there anything about your community that makes you feel proud? Imagine it is the 1920s and you are in Harlem, a thriving neighborhood in New York City. The nightlife, the bright lights, even the sidewalks hum with excitement. The drums and a screaming clarinet to the savvy nightclub. The Savoy, is huge. City block. The singer, Cab Calloway, is in his white tuxedo. Miss Clifton just put her glasses on, so let me start over. Imagine it is in the 1920s, and you are in Harlem, a thriving neighborhood of New York City. The nightlife, the bright lights, even the sidewalks hum with excitement. The thump-thump of drums and a screaming clarinet draw you into the Savoy nightclub. The Savoy is huge, the size of a city block. The singer Cab Calloway in his white tuxedo shakes, swaggers, and chants jazz to the crowd. Across the ballroom, as far as the eye can see, sharply dressed men and women covered with the latest dance steps. The caption for the picture there says Duke Ellington was a legendary jazz pianist and conductor. For years, he performed in Harlem before his fame spread around the world. In Harlem in the 1920s, exciting jazz was everywhere. New Yorkers from downtown took the A train north. They came for dinner, dancing, and the adventure of something new. Harlemites, the African American people who lived in Harlem, dressed up and enjoyed going out. Up at the top, the caption says, trumpeter Louis Armstrong pioneered the jazz star who symbolized tolerance and love. Harlem's popular nightclubs attracted top jazz players from the country. A handsome young piano player named Duke Ellington led bands. The singer Bessie Smith was known as of the blues. And when a young trumpet player named Louis Armstrong began to solo of his horn's warmth. No one could deny the genius heard in these black artists' minds and souls. The 1920s was called the Age of Jazz, but the music was only a movement. Today, we call this proud movement the Harlem Renaissance. It was when African American poetry and art blossomed. It was when communities of artists sprang up and grew close. History of hardship. During these years, African Americans produced more art than at any time before. Amazingly, they did this faced hardships that today we can only imagine. Even in northern cities, there were whites only jazz clubs. The only African Americans allowed in these clubs were the ones performing on stage for white customers. But in the South, the discrimination was far worse. Jim Crow laws or black codes, stripped away basic rights. Black people often worked in white people's homes, but their own families were not allowed to live in white neighborhoods, nor were they welcome in white businesses such as restaurants, nor were they allowed to pray in white churches, and black children were not allowed to attend white children's schools. Ugh. The Great Migration North. Between 1910 and 1930, over 1 million African Americans left the southern. Exit is known as the Great Migration North. At the time, many worked as sharecroppers. Sharecroppers were farmers who did not own land. They farmed someone else's land and paid rent with a share of their crops. It was a tough way to scratch out a living, to be sure. Things got even worse when the price of cotton dropped. The boll weevil destroyed cotton crops. Desperate to escape discrimination, and now had to leave home. The northern part of the country was more prosperous than factories needed workers. Southern workers needed to escape grinding poverty. So African Americans flocked to northern cities like New York, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. They came by train, bus, rickety cars, and trucks. They wanted the same thing immigrants hope for today: better jobs, better housing, more freedom, and a better life. What brought them to Harlem? Harlem in the 1920s had it all. It was a prosperous, fashionable, and black neighborhood in New York. Sure, it was more expensive to rent an apartment in Harlem, but whether you cut hair downtown, it felt good to live in a place that people went. If you're going to be poor anyway, it's better in Harlem. This poem shows the pride that newcomers took in their new home. Chant another song of Harlem, not about the wrong Harlem, but the worthy throng of Harlem, proud that they belong in Harlem. If you were a serious African American artist moving to Harlem, Harlem had well-known theaters, music clubs. The Harlem community welcomed new artists. American artists moved there from all over the country, even from the Caribbean islands like Jamaica. In Harlem, poets and painters who had felt alone found each other. They could work on their art together or by themselves all night, and no one would come. Poetry readings on any night. Now imagine you are in Harlem after midnight. Up you climb flights of stairs to arrive in someone's living room. Famous African American poets have gathered with readers eager to share their ideas. T. Cullen, wearing a coat and tie, graduate of New York University. He even earned a master's degree in English from Harvard University. He reads his poem, Heritage, a World of Africa. He explains that he has traveled to Africa mind's eye. Another, my name is Langston Hughes, he begins. Both writers express themselves in crisp English. Their command of words makes it clear that they read a great many books. Still, their writing styles are different. Cullen's verse sounds formal, more classical. Hughes writes poems the way ordinary people speak. Readings, their editor, Jessie Fawcett, claps the loudest. She is the poetry editor of the magazine The Crisis, and she has helped launch the careers of many Renaissance writers. Now, she proclaims, we have a chance to be known to white readers. White readers want to know the truth about Black people, and Black writers are the most qualified to let that truth be known. Talent and great works produced. Talented Black artists were ready. They produced poetry, novels, photography, sculpture, theater, dance, and of course, the era of jazz. One important book was an anthology or collection called The New Negro. It contained the works of 34 Harlem writers. It was edited by Alan Locke. Its purpose was to introduce the talents of African American writers who were eager to prove themselves to the world. Graduated from Cornell University and studied arts. Those she worked with admired her energy. Picture of her. The apartments that they were talking about climbing up the stairs to go into. One of the most original novels from this era was Cain by Jean Toomer. The author had fair skin and a northern upbringing. This allowed him to pass between the black and white worlds, but teaching at a school down south filled out his perspective. He wrote Cain as part narrative, part poetry, and part play. Critics called it a masterpiece. It was like nothing readers had ever seen before. Langston Hughes and County Cullen published whole books of poetry. Neil Hurston, a Southerner, combined folklore with short stories. Later, she would write her masterpiece novel, Their Eyes Were Watching. Author Zora Neale Hurston combined folklore with fiction. At parties, she captivated listeners with songs and stories that she would tell in Southern dialect. The picture next to that says the highly educated County Cullen wanted to be a poet. Aaron Douglas became known as the studied both African and modern art. His murals captured his people's heritage and became another source of Black pride. African Americans also created theater, wrote, produced, and performed Broadway musicals. One major hit was called Blackbirds of 1928. It featured popular songs and dancing and became the longest-running all-Black revue on Broadway. Playwrights who wrote serious theater, in other words, not musicals, also produced plays for all audiences. Haiti was the name of a successful serious play. It had a cast of dozens and played in Harlem's Lafayette Theater, the first theater in New York to desegregate. Adelaide Hall was one of the stars of Blackbird of 1928. Her career spanned over 70 years. Spent freely on parties. They would celebrities into their homes, including Harlem artists who were suddenly in fashion. This made it possible for Black people and white people to mix in ways that before were not imaginable. One of her mother had become America's millionaire. She had left Aaliyah a fortune. Langston Hughes called Aaliyah the goddess of Harlem because she loved to help everyone around her enjoy life. In the end, she converted her mansion into a club, a place where all types of artists could meet and make friends. Harlem socialites like Aaliyah Walker threw lavish together. Carl Van Vechten, a Harlem expert, and his wife would throw lavish parties of their own. He was an example of an arts patron. When he found Harlem writers he admired, he made sure newspapers like the New York Times wrote about them. This helped Renaissance writers become known beyond Harlem. He would also regularly lead tours to Harlem to introduce his wealthy friends to his community. Rent parties helped ordinary people get to know each other, too. If someone was short of money to pay the rent for their apartment, they would throw a party and charge guests around 20 cents each. The food and drinks were nothing fancy, but the host would hire musicians so that people could dance. One week, you might go to a neighbor's show up. A golden era comes to a close. The stock market crash of 1929 was the beginning of the end of the Harlem Renaissance. Patrons didn't have enough money for parties and clubs like before. As the Great Depression gripped the country, theaters, nightclubs, and poetry magazines had to close. Langston Hughes left Harlem in 1931. He said, "We were no longer in vogue anyway, we Negroes." Poor Southerners continued to move north. Harlem got overcrowded, its buildings run down. By 1935, we are left with a treasure trove. They also left us timeless questions, strategy through asking and answering questions that I want you to consider. If you would like, you can pause the video and write down your answers in complete sentences, and I may give you a surprise tomorrow. Question number 1, what was Harlem like in the 1920s? Number 2, what historical event caused the end of the Harlem Renaissance? Number 3, how were people able to afford the art, parties, and other things that were part of the Harlem Renaissance? Number 4, where does the story take place? How did Carl Van Vechten help the Harlem Renaissance? Number 6, why did the story suggest it was better to be poor in Harlem? Number 7, what was a rent party? Number 8, what is a sharecropper? And number 9, who were 3 of the famous artists that were part of the Harlem Renaissance, and what did they do? Okay, guys, thank you so much for hanging with me. Now, I would like for you to get on your iReady reading pathway unless you are choosing to do some of the questions. Please know that Go Guardian is on, and if you are on something that you're not supposed to be on, that there will be consequences for that. I love you all, and I hope to see you tomorrow.